So Clive, thanks very much for joining us. First of all, in modern elite sport, whether rugby or anything else in your Olympic experience, how important is mental preparation compared to the physical preparation?
I think they're both important. I don't think you can ignore either of them. But I think it's down to, I think every coach is different, every athlete's different, certain sports are different. So you've got to find out what works for you. There's no right or wrong answer here. And I know teams, individuals are very successful, and they've got sort of high-profile kind of sports psychologists working with them. I also know individuals and teams that are equally successful, keep totally away from the kind of the mind side, and they just focus on preparation. So there's no right or wrong answer to that, to answer your question.
Last year I read an article that you wrote in the Daily Mail saying how you used to engage in mind games before big test matches. Was that planned or was it off the cuff?
I didn't play any mind games with the players. I played some mind games with my opposite coaches and the media. I used to quite enjoy that. I didn't think it was mind games. It was just putting some fun and enjoyment into a pretty competitive situation. So yeah, it wasn't off the cuff. I used to think about it. There were times where for example, we'd play badly in a game. You kind of predict that you're going to go in, and maybe one or two of your players are going to get some sticks. So you kind of go in and try and deflect from that and throw a few hand grenades to try and get the stuff coming your way, because that's your job as a head coach, to take the kind of stick for the team. And also when the team's played really well, to kind of make sure praise goes to the players. So you can use your position in a right way, in a fun way, and it's all good fun really.
And when Eddie Jones, I remember that during that sort of run up to 03, he used to enjoy a little bit of banter with you. Did any of it get under your skin?
He was the worst. He was what people didn't realise, myself and Eddie, we were just good friends, and we used to speak to each other on the phone, and so I used to hear what he said in the press. He used to know what I said in the press. So no, did it get under his skin? Absolutely not. It was just a case of you used to read it and just chuckle and know you're going to see him for a beer. So now I'm close. I was probably close to Eddie Jones, more close to Eddie than any other coach. But in the press, the press loved this kind of rivalry, which, to be fair, we both stirred up, because it was a great rivalry to have between England and Australia, and two really good teams. So no, it was just good fun.
Dr. Steve Peters has done a lot of good work in this area, I know, with many Olympians. When in your time in rugby, did you employ a psychologist to work with any of the players, or give some mental lessons? No,
I never employed a sports psychology. I certainly spoke to one or two people myself. Probably the best well-known, I went to Israel to meet with a guy called Yudah Shanir, who was I think he'd call himself a sports psychologist. He fundamentally worked with the Israeli Armed Forces. He was brilliant. But to me, sports psychology has to come to the coaches. That's just my own personal view. I actually like getting new ideas, new thoughts coming in, but I like to put it into my language, kind of rugby language, and then I think myself and my fellow coaches can deliver it how we see fit to the actual coaches. So never actually bought, I think there's no England rugby player would stand up and say, could name a sports psychologist. We didn't use them with the players, but we certainly used them with myself and the coaching team, just for new ideas. And certainly Yudah Shanir would head that list of kind of new ideas that you kind of thought, actually that's pretty smart thinking and a new way of looking at things.
I spoke to some of the 2011 winning All Blacks, and they had different strategies. Kieran Reid would stamp his foot because he'd lose focus. That was one of his. Marnonu, they had redheads, people who got in a rage and had coping mechanisms. You had the teacup thing, thinking clearly under pressure. Was that something that you drilled into the players? Because we often saw that sign.
Yeah, it was actually thinking correctly, the keywords correctly. We can all think clearly, because you can think clearly to make the wrong decision. It's all about making the correct decision. So, and I got this from Yudah Shanir. It was having the ability under pressure to make the correct decision. And we used to do a huge amount of coaching around this. A lot of it in the kind of classroom. You could do a lot of coaching inside, and we're just setting up scenarios and situations. And it's like, what would you do in this situation? What would we do in this situation? And quite simply, there should be nothing happens in the game of rugby, on the field or off the field of play, that you've not planned for and thought through. And if you've thought it through, planned through, if it does happen, there's a very high chance you're going to make the correct decision. If something happens in a game that you never thought about before, there's a very high chance you won't make the correct decisions, and then people, all these horrible words in sport, freeze, choke, all these horrible words, and that can happen. So the key thing is everything has to be planned, and your mind is very strong then. So whether you call this mind games or sports psychology, I don't really care, but to me, is preparing every individual, excuse me, has to know what had happened in that situation, and a lot of that is done in a classroom situation, and that way you can shortcut experience, and that's the secret to it.
Was an example of that in Wellington when you went down to 13 men and 6 in the scrum on the line? Had you gone through that scenario?
I'd like to say yes, the answer is no. We've done through a lot of scenarios of 14 men, but I had not actually thought through 13 men. But to be fair, that the players, because we'd all, what would happen if certain players go off and how we handle this. When it goes to 13, you kind of, they got the job done. But it's a really big important part. You've got a 6-man scrum. If it's your ball, do you put 2 players on the side from the backs and leave your backs exposed, or do you trust your scrum and go with 6? So we've talked about all that, but we're always working on, if one player gets yellow card or one player gets sent off, you still win, you see. That's the key thing, is just to be down to 14 or 13, you can still win. You've just got to change your mindset. But if you're making it up during the game, that's not the right thing to do. The time to discuss it is in the privacy of your team meeting rooms, document it and really make sure every single player understands that's what we're going to do. So when it happens, there's a high correlation. You'll make the correct decisions under a pressure situation.
Last question, because I know time is going, was that winning run that you got over the Southern Hemisphere teams, that winning mentality, I mean, you talked about it in your book, that's a mind thing as well, isn't it? How important was that run of consecutive victories?
Well, I'm not sure it's a mind thing, because physically you've got to go and play the games and win. You can look back and say it's a mind thing. At the time, it's just, I made no bones about it. The priority, if England were going to win the World Cup, we had to start beating the Southern Hemisphere. You can't just turn to a World Cup and think, well, let's give it a go. So we just made the whole focus of the year was on playing the Southern Hemisphere games. They were the big games in the autumn and in the summer, and you prioritise those games. So in Olympic terms, you're trying to peak for those times. And that's what we did, and I made it very clear, if we're going to win a World Cup, we've got to start beating these guys, and we've got to try and arrive as favourites, and that's what happened, and then the Six Nations was almost like preparing for the Southern Hemisphere games, and that's how we did it, which was a bit of a big call at the time, but that's what we actually did, and yeah, it kind of worked because we ended up with this amazing run, but I still love playing against New Zealand, Australia and South Africa. They were the teams I wanted to beat, quite simply because we never have done it before.